Good afternoon. Today I am not hiking the Appalachian Trail in 100 days. I actually finished my through hike about a week ago, so I have all the costs accounted for, and in this video we're going to be talking exactly about all those costs and how much I spent throughout the trip, how much I spent before the trip, and maybe what I could have done better in terms of costs along the way. So starting right off with one of the biggest expenses, which was gear. I spent about $1,400 in total on gear. The exact number was $1,381.64. And about $1,100 of that I spent before the trip even started, in probably the 6 months leading up to the trip, just getting ready. So I bought a backpack, I bought like a rain jacket, some pants, socks, boots, stuff like that. And then I spent about $300 along the way in terms of gear, and that was like 2 pairs of shoes I bought along the way, and I bought lots of stove fuel. It's hard to calculate exactly how much I spent on stove fuel, because a lot of times that was wrapped up in other purchases, but it was somewhere between 50 and $100 throughout the whole trip on stove fuel, which is more than I was thinking I would spend for sure. And maybe some other little things, but the total there was about $1,400 in terms of all my gear. And there were some gear items I didn't have to purchase, so I already had a sleeping bag and a sleeping pad that I just had from prior camping, so that's what I used. And then my tent was a Big Agnes tent that my parents bought for me and gifted for Christmas last year, so that was really awesome. It was a super nice tent, and I'm incredibly grateful for that gift and being able to use that tent. And then the next biggest expense for me was food. And I kind of split my food up into 2 different categories. The first is resupply and food that I was pretty much carrying in my pack. And for that, I spent $716.41. And most of this I bought beforehand, around $400 or $500 worth of food I bought before the trip. And I packaged it all up in boxes, and my dad shipped it out every few days. And so then there was a few times along the way that I just stopped at grocery stores and stuff like that and bought my food there. But I also spent a lot of money on other food, just like snacks and getting, food at a restaurant in town or like at a little gas station. And I actually spent more money on that food. I spent $764 on what I just call extra and snacks. So, a lot of times when I would go into town, I would, go to some restaurant or get some extra snacks somewhere. And a lot of places along the way, even if I wasn't going like into a town, maybe there was a gas station like down the road or some sort of deli. There's an area in New York and New Jersey where there's lots of delis along the trail pretty close by. So definitely spent a lot of money on snacks, but I needed the calories, which I came to realize. And so I'm definitely happy that I treated myself a little bit and spent that money, but that's definitely an area where I could have done better in terms of maybe planning better beforehand and packing more food in my resupply boxes, and then not buying as much in terms of like snack food along the way. And then from there, those are really the major expenses. I had some hostel expenses. I wasn't really planning on staying in any hostels at the beginning of the trip, but I ended up doing that anyway. Along the way, I stayed in 5 total, and like 3 of those were pretty cheap, and then the other 2 were like the majority of this cost. So I think 2 of the hostels were $45 and $50, and part of that cost included shuttles to and from the trail, and then the other hostels were like $30, and then the other 2 were technically free, but I made a $10 donation at one of them, and then the last one I did like a work for stay, so that was completely free. So $135 total on hostels, and then I also had some camping expenses for different campsites of $105. And honestly, the vast majority of that, I think like $85 of that, was just from Baxter State Park in Maine, where Mount Katahdin is. And the reason I spent so much there is because I was originally planning to start at the end of May, so I reserved my campground, and then Katahdin didn't open, so I couldn't start until the beginning of June, and I didn't really know, essentially, before I could have, canceled my reservation, what day I wanted to re-reserve a campsite for. So I ended up just paying for 2 different days of campsites there, and technically kind of wasted a little money, but not the end of the world. And then there was a few campsites, like in the White Mountains, and that I had to pay like a few bucks for, so that's the remaining expenses. And then permits, there were a few places along the trail in the Shenandoah National Park and Smoky Mountain National Park that you're supposed to buy like backcountry camping permits, so I spent $39 on that. And shipping expenses for me personally, I only spent $22 on shipping, and that was just to buy some boxes beforehand. And then at one point I shipped a few items back home, just like a long pair of pants and my damaged phone. And then travel expenses, I didn't bear the burden of much travel expenses. I think this was just some gas on the way back home. And then my last item is just miscellaneous, $338. A large majority of that is my phone. So in the White Mountains, my phone basically got very waterlogged and damaged. So I had to get a new phone in Hanover, New Hampshire. So I think that was like $200. And then I added the guidebook that I bought, the AWOL guide, and then the Far Out app maps in the miscellaneous category. So that's like another $100 there. So total miscellaneous items is $338. So that brings my total cost to $3,532.66, which I think is fairly in line with what people kind of recommend or say. So I've heard somewhere around $1,200 to $1,500 per month. So for 100 days, this $3,500 is like $1,100 per month ish, something like that. So that's a little bit below, but pretty close. I definitely didn't stay in many hostels relative to a lot of people, I think. And so I think that helped to some degree, but I also spent a lot on food, I think, and probably I would guess I spent more on food than most people on average, but I'm not really sure. And just to give you another kind of view of the expenses, this is a pie chart. So we can see gear is the biggest expense at about 40%. And then my two food categories each are about 20%. So about 40% on food total there. And then everything else makes up the remaining 20% there. Miscellaneous about 10%. And then camping, hostels, and permits, pretty small there as well as travel and shipping, which aren't even shown on that pie chart. That's kind of the breakdown. Now, there are some other costs of the trip that didn't fall on me at all, and my parents basically paid for it because they were the ones, paying for it at the time, and they basically said you can do chores and work at home basically to make up for that. And they said they'd leave me somewhere a list or accounting of all the money they spent on these types of things, but I couldn't find it when I got home, and they're on a big trip right now, so I won't have that probably for a while. But I would guess they spent about $400 on shipping all my resupply boxes out. So I did most of my resupply through the post office system, and my dad shipped boxes out every few days for me. I think most of the boxes were around $20 of shipping based on, what I saw when I got the boxes, and I had 17 total boxes. So somewhere between $300 and $400 there, I would guess, on shipping. And then my dad did purchase some additional food along the way, like some Mountain House meals and little snacks and stuff like that. So he probably spent, I don't know, maybe $100, $200, maybe $300 on that extra food, is what I would guess. And then also my parents drove me up to Maine and dropped me off there, so they had some travel expenses there that I didn't have to pay for. So overall, I would say there's probably somewhere in the range of $500 to $1,000 of shipping, food, and travel costs that didn't fall on me for the trip, but would have been part of, a typical through hike expense, I guess. So that puts the total, close to $4,500, which is definitely more in line with the $1,200 to $1,500 a month. And honestly, I'm happy myself that I kept my costs, below $4,000. I was definitely very much hoping to keep it below $5,000. So definitely avoided $5,000. So the total cost for me was $3,500, like we said. I think the main ways I could have done better on that is in terms of being, I guess, more disciplined with my food and a little bit more frugal in that regard. But also, definitely in the second half of the trip, I was like, I'm losing weight. I don't want to lose weight. So whenever I get to a town or a little gas station or deli or whatever, I'm just going to buy some food here because I don't want to lose weight. So I want to eat a little bit of extra food right now. And I also had the ice cream streak idea going on. So I was always trying to get some ice cream any way I could. So that definitely contributed to the food expense. And then I didn't spend all that much money on hostels, but I definitely could have done without most of those and pretty much eliminated that expense, I would say. But for the most part, they were pretty convenient and helped me get into town and get my resupply. And for the most part, I stayed at, the cheaper hostels and didn't tend to stay at any of the more expensive ones. So I don't think I did too bad on that at all. And definitely completing the AT in a little bit quicker time than average helped me keep costs down a little bit as well, because I finished the AT in 100 days. And so if I spent about $1,500 on food for that 100 days, that's about $15 a day. So if, it took me 150 days, which is probably pretty typical, I would say, of a lot of people, then, I would have been spending, over $2,000 in total on food, most likely. And same with some of the other expenses like hostels. Maybe you might stay in more hostels if it's taking you a longer time to do the trail. And even gear, like you're going to have more gear issues, I would say, the longer you're on trail, and you might have to replace some gear items, stuff like that. So the quicker trip, 100 days, it definitely helped me keep costs down as well, which I was satisfied with. So if you have hiked the AT before, I would be interested to hear how much you spent on your thru hike and how it compares, maybe how you saved some money along the way. Like I said, final cost for me was $3,500. I was not a platinum blazer in any regard. I was trying to be reasonably frugal and not spend tons of money, but I was also definitely trying not to lose weight. So $3,500 was the total. And I hope this gave some insight into the major expenses you might have on an AT thru hike and what the magnitude of those expenses might be.